There was at least 3, I think, outside either my district office or my home. And you're correct, my son, my then 15-year-old son, was home by himself for the first one. All of my personal information was doxed online. It was my personal email, my personal cell phone, my home phone number. In fact, we had to disconnect our home phone for about 3 days because it would ring all hours of the night and would fill up with messages.
Brian Cutler, we're outside.
Clerks facing felony charges in Michigan. Poll watchers denied access.
These ads were another element in the effort. The Trump campaign spent millions of dollars running ads online and on television.
The evidence is overwhelming. Call your governor and legislators. Demand they inspect the machines and hear the evidence.
Public pressure on state officials often grew dangerous in the lead up to January 6th.
Let us in! Let us in! Let us in! Let us in! Special session! Special session! Special session! We'll light the whole shit on fire.
What are we going to do? What can you and I do for state legislators besides kill them? Although we should not do that. I'm not advising that, but I mean, what else can you do, right?
The punishment for treason is death.
The state pressure campaign and the danger it posed to state officials and the state capitals around the nation was a dangerous precursor to the violence we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. Today, you will hear from Rusty Bowers, the Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. He will tell us about his conversations with the President, with Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, and what the President's team asked of him, and how his oath of office would not permit it. You will then hear from Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, who Trump directed to, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist, but just the exact number of votes needed to overtake Joe Biden. You will also hear from Gabriel Sterling, the chief operating officer, his chief operating officer, about the spurious claims of fraud in the elections in Georgia, and who, responding to a cascading set of threats to his elections team, warned the president to stop, that someone was going to get.
Estamos en vivo en estos momentos.
You will hear from Wandrea ArShaye, a former local elections worker.
Están llevando adelante las audiencias que empezaron hace 2 semanas. Los demócratas quieren de alguna manera encontrar culpable al expresidente Donald Trump de lo ocurrido en el Capitolio el año pasado, el 6 de enero. Estamos completamente en vivo ahora mismo. Están llevando una audiencia, están poniendo testimonios, están poniendo llamadas telefónicas, muchas cosas que sucedieron antes de los disturbios.
And a system held because people of courage, Republicans and Democrats, like the witnesses you will hear today, put their oath to the country and Constitution above any other.
Deme su opinión. Estamos en vivo. Audiencia sobre lo ocurrido en los disturbios del Capitolio el año pasado.
I now welcome our first panel of witnesses.
Deme su opinión, por favor.
By a distinguished legislator from Arizona, Rusty Bowers, who's a Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. Mr. Bowers was first elected to the state legislature in 1993 and has served as Speaker since 2019. Welcome, Speaker Bowers. Brad Raffensperger is the 29th Secretary of State of Georgia, serving in this role since 2019. As an elected official and a Republican, Secretary Raffensperger
Gracias a todos por sus comentarios.
supervising elections in Georgia and maintaining the state's public records. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Gabriel Sterling is the Chief Operating Officer in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Mr. Sterling was the statewide voting systems.
Están presentando algunas de las personas que van a dar testimonios y van a estar hablando en esta audiencia. Gracias. Déjeme su comentario y también regálame un like.
I will swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand.
Saludos. Ellos van a jurar ahora que van solamente a decir la verdad frente al jurado y el comité.
The testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Speaker Bowers, thank you for being with us today. You're the Speaker of the Arizona House and a self-described conservative Republican. You campaigned for President Trump and with him during the 2020 election. Is it fair to say that you wanted Donald Trump to win a second term in office?
Le están preguntando con respecto al expresidente Donald Trump, porque él dirigió una de las campañas.
And is it your understanding that President Biden was the winner of the popular vote in Arizona?
Le están preguntando, ¿usted entiende que el presidente Biden fue el ganador
Pursuant to Section 5C8
por
of House
votaciones?
Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for questions.
Speaker Bowers, thank you for being with us today. Before we begin with the questions that I had prepared for you, I wanted to ask you about a statement that former President Trump issued, which I received just prior to the hearing. Have you had a chance to review that statement?
My counsel called from Arizona and read it to me. Yes, sir.
In that statement, I won't read it.
Gracias a todos los que están comentando, le agradezco mucho.
Trump begins by calling you a rhino, Republican in name only. He then references a conversation in November 2020 in which he claims that you told him that the election was rigged and that he had won Arizona. To quote the former president, during the conversation, he told me the election was rigged and that I won Arizona, unquote. Did you have such a conversation with the president?
I did have a conversation with the president.
Le están diciendo exactamente las palabras y ahora le están preguntando a él si él sí habló con
Parts of it that are true.
el presidente. Le está diciendo que sí, que parte de esa conversación es completamente cierta.
Is that false?
Anywhere, anyone, anytime has said that I said the election was rigged, that would not be true.
And when,
Que él no cree de lo que él piensan que él dice que las elecciones fueron robadas.
That is also false.
Mr. Bowers, I understand that after the election, and I don't know whether this is the conversation the former president is referring to, but after the election, you received a phone call from President Trump and Rudy Giuliani.
Después de las elecciones recibiste una
Of the presidential election in Arizona.
llamada del presidente
Tell us about that call.
Trump. ¿Nos puede decir sobre esa llamada?
Mr. Giuliani raised allegations of election fraud.
Thank you. My wife and I had returned from attending our church meetings. It was on a
Regresamos
Sunday.
yo y mi esposa de la
We
iglesia.
were still in the driveway and
Estábamos todavía en el
I received a
parqueo.
call from a colleague telling me
Recibimos
that
la
the White
llamada.
House was trying to get in touch with her and I, and that she said, please, if you get a call, let's try to take this together. Immediately, I saw that the White House on my Bluetooth was calling.
Envió la llamada de la Casa Blanca.
Asked by I would presume the operator at the White House if I would hold for the president, which I did, and Mr. Giuliani came on first.
Empezó a hablarle Giuliani en el teléfono
Niceties. Then Mr. Trump,
y
President
después
Trump, then President
el
Trump came
presidente
on.
Trump también estuvo en la llamada.
We initiated a conversation.
Empezaron a hablar.
During that conversation,
Durante la llamada,
you ask Mr. Giuliani for proof of these allegations of fraud that he was making?
On multiple occasions, yes.
él le preguntó a Giuliani con respecto a las alegaciones de fraude y él dice que sí le preguntó.
And I asked him, do you have names?
¿Tienen
For
nombres?
example, you have 200,000 illegal immigrants.
Tienen 200,000 inmigrantes
5,000 or 6,000
indocumentados.
dead people, etc. And I said, do you have their names?
¿Tienen los nombres?
Yes.
Y él dijo
Will
que
you
sí.
give them to me?
¿Me los
Yes.
podría dar?
The president interrupted and said, give the man what he needs.
Y el presidente interrumpió allí en la llamada y dijo, darle a él lo que
At least
necesita.
2 occasions that interchange in the conversation.
So Mr. Giuliani was claiming in the call that there were hundreds of thousands of undocumented people and
Así que el señor Giuliani estaba diciendo que habían cientos de miles indocumentados
and you asked him for evidence of that.
y tú le preguntaste por
And did he
evidencia de
ever
eso.
did you ever receive from him that evidence?
¿Recibiste
either
la
during the call,
lista
after the
con los
call, or to
nombres
this
en algún
day?
momento?
Never.
No.
What was the ask during this call. He was making these allegations of fraud, but he had something or
Él
a
estaba
couple
haciendo estas
things,
alegaciones de
that they
fraude en la
wanted you to do.
llamada.
What were those?
The ones I remember were first that we would hold, that I would allow an official committee at the Capitol so that they could hear this evidence and that we
Que
could
él
take
hiciera lo
action
posible para
thereafter.
llevar una audiencia en el
And I
Capitolio
refused.
para
He
que
said,
supieran
up to
sobre el
that time,
fraude.
the circus, I called it a circus, had been brewing with lots of demonstrations, both at the counting center, at the Capitol, and other places. And I didn't want to have that in the House.
Le estuvieron
I did
pidiendo
not
a él el
feel that the
favor y
evidence
que él no quería llevar
presented
eso
in its
adelante.
absence merited
The House
a
of
hearing, and I
Representatives.
didn't want to be used as a pawn.
Él no quería ser usado para
There was
llevar
some
esto adelante.
other need that the committee hearing would fulfill. So that was the first ask, that we hold an official committee hearing.
And what was his second ask?
¿Y qué otra cosa
said,
te preguntó?
To what end the hearing? He said, well, we have heard by an official high up in the Republican
Hemos escuchado
legislature
por una persona muy
that there
importante
is a legal theory or a legal ability in Arizona that you can remove the electors of President Biden and replace them.
que se pueden
And we
remover
would like to have the
algunas de
legitimate
las
opportunity through the
votos
committee to
del
come to that
presidente
end
Biden
and
y
remove
ponérselos
that. And I
a
said, that's
el
something that's
presidente
totally
Trump.
new to me. I've never heard of any such thing.
Yo nunca había escuchado
And he
algo
pressed that
sobre
point.
esto.
And I said, look,
Y yo dije,
you are asking me to do something
si tú me estás
that is
pidiendo
counter to
algo,
my oath when I swore to the Constitution to
yo
uphold
juré
it,
frente a la
and I
Constitución de los
also
Estados Unidos
swore
siempre
to
ir
the
con la verdad
Constitution
adelante
and the laws of the state of Arizona.
y
And this
cumplir
is
con las
totally
leyes del
foreign.
estado de
It's an
Arizona.
idea or a theory to me, and I would never do anything
Y yo nunca
of such magnitude without deep
haría algo de esta
consultation with
magnitud.
qualified attorneys. And I said, I've got some good attorneys, and I'm going to give you their names.
Yo tengo buenos abogados y te
You're
daría
asking me
los
to do
nombres de
something
ellos.
against my oath, and I will not break my oath.
Yo no voy a romper lo que yo juré
I think that was
frente a
up
la
to that point.
Constitución de los Estados Unidos.
During the conversation, and you heard, I think, when we played a snippet of Mr. Giuliani calling other state legislators and saying that he was calling us essentially a fellow Republican. Did he make a similar appeal to you or bring up the fact that you shared a similar party?
Whether it was in that call or in a later meeting, he did bring that up more than once.
And how would he bring that up?
He would say, aren't we all Republicans here? I would think we would get a better
Constantemente
reception.
le traían el tema y a veces preguntaban, ¿somos todos aquí republicanos?
And this evidence that you
Estas
asked
evidencias
him for that would justify this extraordinary step,
que
I think you said they never
estás
produced it. Why
pidiendo
did you feel, either in the absence
nunca
of
lo
that
presentaron?
evidence, or with it, what they were asking you to do would violate your oath to the Constitution?
First of all, when the people, and in Arizona, I believe it's some 40 plus years earlier, the legislature had established the manner
Primero
of
que nada, hace
electing
40 años,
officials,
las personas en Arizona,
for the presidential race. Once it was given to the people,
una
as
vez se
in
le
Bush v.
daba a las
Gore,
personas,
illustrated by the Supreme Court, it becomes a fundamental right of the people.
ya
So,
vendría a
as far as
ser
I was
algo
concerned, for
fundamental
someone
de
to
las
ask me
personas del estado de Arizona.
I would call it a paucity. There was no evidence being presented of any strength. Evidence can be hearsay evidence. It's still evidence.
No
But it's
había
still
ninguna
hearsay.
evidencia presentada
But
en ningún
strong
momento.
judicial quality evidence, anything that would say to me, you
Cualquier
have a
cosa que le
doubt,
pueda decir a él
deny your oath.
que niegue
I will
su
not do that.
juramento,
And on
que
more
él no
than
haría algo así. En otras palabras, él está diciendo que él no iría en contra de lo que él juró frente a la
one
Constitución. Él no
occasion
iría
throughout all
a
this,
hacer
that has
algo
been brought up,
que
and it is a
pusiera
tenet of
su
my
reputación
faith
por el piso.
that the Constitution is divinely inspired of my most basic foundational beliefs. And so for me to do that because somebody just asked me to,
Yo hacer algo así solamente porque alguien me lo pida,
foreign to my very being. I will
no
not do
sería
it.
incapaz yo de ir a eso, de hacer eso.
During that conversation, Speaker Bowers, did you ask him if what he was proposing had ever been done before?
I did.
And what did he say?
¿Le preguntaste si alguna vez lo que te estaba proponiendo había sido propuesto antes? Sí, le pregunté.
I don't think so. And that also was brought up in other conversations, both with him and with John Eastman and others.
Speaker Bowers, I understand that a week after that call, Mr. Giuliani appeared with others associated with President Trump's effort to overturn the result of the election at a purported legislative hearing in a hotel ballroom in Phoenix.
Gracias a todos ustedes que están comentando. Estamos en vivo. Regálame un like, deme su comentario. Estamos con la audiencia que empezó hace 2 semanas sobre los disturbios, lo que pasó en el Capitolio, enero 6 del año pasado.
But when they asked me to have an official hearing, we establish it by protocols, public notice, etc. It's typically held at the Capitol, but doesn't need to be. We can authorize a hearing off campus. And in this case, I had been asked on several occasions to allow a hearing. I denied it, but said, you're free to hold a meeting, any meeting you want, to the person who asked, and which he ultimately did. I think he was a little frustrated, but he ultimately did.
This meeting was the same day, I believe, that the governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, certified Biden as the winner of the presidential election in Arizona. Did you meet with Mr. Giuliani and his associates while they were in Phoenix sometime after that purported legislative hearing at the hotel?
Yes, I did, sir.
¿Te reuniste con Giuliani después de esa propuesta? Sí. ¿Te habló nuevamente del fraude electoral? Sí, sobre las votaciones que hubieron de personas que estaban fallecidas y también indocumentados.
And then I proceeded to question him on the proof that he was going to bring me, etc.
También le pregunté sobre las pruebas que él me iba a presentar.
They were, yes, sir.
And did they also press him for proof of these allegations?
They pressed him very strongly.
Sí, ellos también lo presionaron para la presentación de evidencias.
On his team to help him out with the evidence?
He did. He asked Jenna Ellis, who was sitting to his right. One thing was that it was more to the point of, was there sufficient evidence or action that we could justify the recalling of the electors? But at that part of the conversation, I know he referred to someone else. But he did ask, do we have the proof, to Jenna, Miss Ellis? And she said, yes. And I said, I want the names. Do you have the names? Yes.
Él siguió preguntando por las pruebas
How they voted.
Y pidiendo los nombres. ¿Cómo fue posible que tantas personas indocumentados ilegales pudieron votar en estas elecciones? Necesito las pruebas. ¿Me las puede presentar? Nuevamente, él preguntó por las pruebas a otros representantes también. Y él repetidamente le dijo, si tienen las evidencias de que hubo mucho fraude, preséntenlas, por favor.
That was Mr. Giuliani.
And what exactly did he say and how that come up?
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. And I don't know if that was a gaffe or maybe he didn't think through what he said, but both myself and others in my group, the three in my group and my council, both remembered that specifically, and afterwards we kind of laughed about it.
Sí.
And getting back to the asking that phone call that preceded this.
Vamos a regresar a la llamada nuevamente.
He wanted you to have the legislature dismiss the Biden electors and replace them with Trump electors on the basis of these theories of fraud?
He did not say it in those exact words, but he did say that that Arizona law, according to what he understood, that would be allowed and that we needed to come into session to take care
Están
of it.
nuevamente hablando del fraude de Arizona. Ustedes saben lo que sucedió,
Again,
que hubo
what
un
I can legally
estanque
and not legally
y una
do, and I
demora
can't go into
para los
session in
votos
Arizona
final completamente de las
unilaterally
elecciones
or on my
por
sole
todo lo que estaba
prerogative.
pasando en Arizona. Nuevamente le está haciendo preguntas con respecto al mismo detalle y del que constantemente le estaban pidiendo a él que él ayudara con esta situación, y él
No one provided me
constantemente
ever
pedía las
such
pruebas
evidence.
de los nombres de las personas que supuestamente estaban fallecidas y había usado sus nombres para ponerle esas votaciones al presidente Biden.
One of those incursions took place in the Arizona House of Representatives building, as you can see in this footage.
Aquí están presentando que ilegalmente entraron ilegalmente a protestar. Y aquí estamos viendo las imágenes de cómo empezó los disturbios el año pasado, el 6 de enero, que le han puesto un cargo a este señor que se sentó de 41 meses en prisión. Y no fue el único, hubieron más arrestos.
I understand these protesters were calling for you by name, Speaker Bowers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Y le estaban
Speaker Bowers, did the president call
llamando a
you
usted
again
por nombre,
later in
estos
December?
que estaban protestando. ¿Es verdad eso? Y él dijo,
Did you
así
tell the
es.
president in that second call that you supported him, that you voted for him, but that you were not going to do anything illegal for him?
Gracias a todos ustedes por el comentario. Regálame un like
Nevertheless, his
y
lawyer,
dame su
John
opinión,
Eastman,
sea
called
cual
you
sea.
some days
Se lo voy a
later, on
agradecer.
June 4th, 2021. And he did have a very specific ask that would have required you to do just what you had already told the president you wouldn't do, something that would violate your oath. Is that correct?
That's correct. It wasn't just me. I had my counsel and others on the call.
And what did Dr. Eastman want you to do?
That we would, in fact, take a vote to overthrow, or I shouldn't say overthrow, that we would decertify the electors, and that because we had plenary authority to do so. And he cited Article 2, Section 1, I think it's Clause 2, and said that in his opinion, that gave us the authority if there was, I don't recall him saying sufficient evidence, but there was some call.
Está hablando de un artículo de la ley que pueden ellos usar, y constantemente le decían que podían usar eso para traer las evidencias y mostrar esto, refiriéndose al fraude electoral. Nuevamente, yo juré frente a la Constitución de los Estados Unidos para decir la verdad, pero
we talked more about the oath, but I said, what would you have me do? And he said, just do it and let the court sort it out.
¿Qué es lo que te gustaría que hiciera? Y le dice, solamente hazlo y deja que la corte haga el resto.
And I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof.
¿Quieren que haga esto y que lleve esto por mi estado sin tener pruebas suficientes? No. ¿Cómo voy a hacer eso yo en mi estado que yo juré defender la Constitución y ser real en todas mis declaraciones, 100% legítimo y con la verdad?
Declined, and I believe that was close to the end of our phone call.
And again, this took place after you had recently spoken with President Trump and told him.
Y esto tomó lugar después que hablaste con el presidente Trump y Giuliani, ¿verdad?
Obviously, it was days after, but
sí, fueron días después.
But you had told President Trump you would not do anything illegal for him.
I did.
Y tú le dijiste al presidente Trump que no ibas a hacer nada ilegal por
And
él.
you
Sí,
told
le
Dr.
dije.
Eastman that you did not believe there was legal support to justify what he was
Y
asking,
nuevamente
but you still
dijiste que no
wanted him
había
to do it,
suficiente
effectively let the courts work it out.
evidencias legales
I've been
para llevar
warned,
esto adelante.
don't say things you think maybe he said, but I do remember him saying that the authority of the legislature was plenary and that you can do it. I said,
Dijo,
"Well,
había
you should know
suficiente
that I can't even
autoridad
call the legislature into session
para hacer esto.
without a 2/3 majority vote."
Y no podemos hacer esto, respondió él, sin
We're only
la mayoría
30
en
plus
votos.
one. There's no way that could happen.
No
In your
es
view,
posible que esto
what he was
pueda
asking you
pasar,
to do
respondió él.
violated your oath to the Constitution, both the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Arizona.
Yes, sir.
Did you also receive a call from U.S. Representative Andy Biggs of
Gracias
Arizona
por
on the morning of
comentarios.
January 6th?
I did.
And what did Mr. Biggs ask you to do?
I believe that was the day that the vote was occurring to each state to have
Constantemente le estaban pidiendo a él muchos favores y él está hablando y dando declaraciones de los diferentes congresistas que lo llamaron, incluyendo Juliana, el presidente Trump y otros de la Cámara de Representantes y algunos senadores, los cuales lo comunicaron a él, hablándole supuestamente los fraudes.
Speaker, on December 4th, 2020, shortly after your meeting with Rudy Giuliani and other allies of President Trump, you released a statement publicly addressing, quote, calls for the legislature to overturn the 2020 certified election results.
Después de haber hablado con Giuliani, tú pusiste un comunicado llamando y pidiendo que se viraran las elecciones. Los resultados de las elecciones que se viraran.
Why did you believe, as you wrote in this statement, that the rule of law forbid you from doing what President Trump and his allies wanted you to do?
Representative, I'm sorry, I should be saying, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schiff, there's two sides.
Hay dos caras.
One is,
Una es
what am I allowed to do?
Lo que yo estoy
And what am I forbidden to do?
lo que puedo hacer y lo que estoy prohibido, lo que no puedo hacer.
Legal pathway, both in state law, nor to my knowledge in federal law, for us to execute such a request.
Hay cosas que tengo que irme por las leyes del Estado y federales para yo poder hacer algunas cosas.
If I'm not specifically authorized as a legislator,
Si no estoy específicamente autorizado como legislador,
then I cannot act.
No puedo actuar.
To the point of calling us into session. Some say that just a few legislators have plenary authority. And that
Como muchos dicen que los legisladores, algunos tienen poca autoridad.
But so to not have authority and be forbidden to act beyond my authority.
Pero no tener autoridad y
estar
prohibido actuar con la autoridad que tengo.
In your statement, you included excerpts
Hace
from
las
President
cosas
Ronald
difíciles.
Reagan's inaugural address in 1981. The newly inaugurated president told the country, quote, "The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries. And few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle." Tell us, if you would, Mr. Speaker, why did you include President Reagan's words in your public statement?
¿Por qué incluiste las palabras del
Chairman, Representative Schiff, because I have a
del
lot of
presidente
admiration
Reagan
for
en tus declaraciones?
I've had the opportunity of going through his home with one other person and walking through, and I have a lot of admiration for him.
Tengo mucha admiración para él.
When he pointed out, which is, I have lived in other country for a period of time and have visited a few countries, and during election times,
Yo he estado en otros países, he vivido en otros países.
we allow an election, support an election and stand behind the election, even in the past when there have been serious questions about the election.
Yo siempre he apoyado las elecciones.
Disturbance.
Le estaban haciendo esta pregunta porque después de él dijo al expresidente en su llamada y a Giuliani que él no podía moverse adelante sin tener evidencias. Le están haciendo preguntas que por qué él después dijo en unas declaraciones que se deberían de virar las votaciones y revisar profundamente nuevamente después de que ya se había declarado ganador al presidente actual de los Estados Unidos, Joe Biden. Entonces ahora le están haciendo una serie de preguntas como tratando de ver por qué se contradijo.
Every 4 years, citizens from all over the United States go to the polls to elect their president.
Todos los años, cientos de miles de ciudadanos van a votar por su presidente cada 4 años. En diciembre, los electores se reúnen para trabajar y llevar las votaciones adelante del pueblo americano. Cada 4 años, después se sientan, cuentan los votos y el ganador se anuncia. Se ha escuchado de mucho fraude sobre las elecciones de 2020 de parte de los republicanos. Los demócratas constantemente ha habido un debate con respecto a esas votaciones.
President Trump's own lawyers, so-called Team Normal, walked away rather than participate in the plan.
Los abogados del expresidente Donald Trump se fueron en vez de participar. Algunas de las audiencias que se llevaron cuando se llevó a Corte Suprema la situación del voto fraudulento según ellos.
A lawyer working with the Trump campaign named Kenneth Cheesebro wrote a memo arguing that the Trump campaign should organize its own
Gracias a todos ustedes que están conectados, le agradezco mucho.
The Select Committee received testimony that those close to President Trump began planning to organize fake electors for Trump in states that Biden won in the weeks after the election.
Sí, lo que están haciendo es tratando de llegar a una conclusión con respecto a lo sucedido el año pasado, el 6 de enero, en el Capitolio de los Estados Unidos. Estos disturbios, ellos están tratando de escuchar las dos partes. Estas son audiencias que se llevan después de lo que sucedió en enero. Porque por un lado dicen que el expresidente incitó a esta violencia, a estos disturbios, mientras que los republicanos dicen que el expresidente no tuvo nada que ver en estos disturbios, que él no incitó a nadie, y que él fue bien claro y dijo que vayan en paz. Deme su opinión con respecto a esto. ¿Usted cree, por favor, en los comentarios, que el expresidente fue culpable, incitó a los disturbios ahí en el Capitolio el año pasado? Deme su opinión, sea cual sea. Me gustaría escuchar lo que usted tenga que decir. Por favor. Y regálame un like si está encontrando valor. Gracias. Volvemos nuevamente con el audio y estoy mirando sus comentarios.
I just remember I either replied or called somebody saying, unless we have litigation pending this, like in these states, like, I don't think this is appropriate, or, you know, this isn't the right thing to do. I don't remember how I phrased it, but I got into a little bit of a back and forth, and I think it was with Ken Cheesebro, where I said, all right, you know, I mean, you just get after it. Like, I'm out.
At that point,
Nuevamente estamos escuchando la audiencia que se está llevando en el Capitolio de los Estados Unidos, en vivo, sobre los disturbios en enero 6 del año pasado.
You are responsible for the electoral college issues moving forward. And this was my way of taking that responsibility to zero.
The committee learned the White House counsel's office also felt the plan was potentially illegal.
And so to be clear, did you hear the White House counsel's office say that this plan to have alternate electors meet and cast votes for Donald Trump in states that he had lost was not legally sound?
Yes, sir.
And who was present for that?
Están poniendo llamadas y testimonios
The select committee interviewed several of
frente
the
al comité,
individual fake electors, as
aquí
well as
en la
Trump campaign
audiencia
staff who
en
helped
el
organize the
Capitolio
effort.
We were just,
sobre los disturbios.
kind of useful idiots or rubes at that point. A strong part of me really feels that it's just kind of as the road continued and as it was failure, that got formulated as what do we have on the table? Let's just do it.
And now, after what we've told you today about the select committee's investigation about the conclusion of the professional lawyers on the campaign staff, Justin Clark, Matt Morgan, and
Regálame
about their
un like
participate in the
y dame
meeting
tu
of these
comentario con
electors.
respecto a estos
How does that
disturbios,
contribute to
sea
your
cual sea.
understanding of these issues?
Un abrazo para todos. Gracias por el cariño, el apoyo. Le agradezco mucho.
I think in a sense, no one really cared if people were potentially putting themselves in jeopardy.
Would you have not wanted to participate in this any further as well?
I absolutely would not have. Had I known that the three main lawyers for the campaign
Ya regreso, amigos. Escuchando la audiencia en vivo desde el Capitolio de los Estados Unidos por los disturbios de enero 6 del año pasado.
These would only count if a court ruled in our favor. So that would have been using our electors, it would have been using our electors in ways that we weren't told about, and we wouldn't have supported.
Documents obtained by the Select Committee indicate that instructions were given to the electors in several states that they needed to cast their ballots in complete secrecy. Because this scheme involved fake electors, those participating in certain states had no way to comply with state election laws, like where the electors were supposed to meet. One group of fake electors even considered hiding overnight to ensure that they could access the state capitol, as required in Michigan.
Did Mr. Norton say who he was working with at all on this effort to have electors meet?
He said he was working with the president's campaign. He told me that the Michigan Republican electors were planning to meet in the Capitol and hide overnight so that they could fulfill the role of casting their vote per law in the Michigan chambers. And I told him in no uncertain terms that that was insane and inappropriate.
In one state, the fake electors even asked for a promise that the campaign would pay their legal fees if they got sued or charged with a crime. Ultimately, fake electors did meet on December 14th, 2020 in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wisconsin. At the request of the Trump campaign, the electors from these battleground states signed documents falsely asserting that they were the, quote, duly elected electors from their state, and submitted them to the National Archives and to Vice President Pence in his capacity as President of the Senate. Here is what some of the fake elector certificates look like as compared to the real ones. But these ballots had no legal effect. In an email produced to the Select Committee, Dr. Eastman told a Trump campaign representative that it did not matter that the electors had not been approved by a state authority. Quote, the fact that we have multiple slates of electors demonstrates the uncertainty of either. That should be enough. He urged that Pence act boldly and be challenged. Documents produced to the Select Committee show that the Trump campaign took steps to ensure that the physical copies of the fake electors' electoral votes from 2 states were delivered to Washington for January 6th. Text messages exchanged between Republican Party officials in Wisconsin show that on January 4th, the Trump campaign asked for someone to fly their fake electors' documents to Washington. A staffer for Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson texted a staffer for Vice President Pence just minutes before the beginning of the joint session. This staffer stated that Senator Johnson wished to hand deliver to the Vice President the fake electors' votes from Michigan and Wisconsin. The vice president's aide unambiguously instructed them not to deliver the fake votes to the vice president. Even though the fake elector slates were transmitted to Congress and the executive branch, the vice president held firm in his position that his role was to count lawfully submitted electoral votes.
Joseph R. Biden Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes.
Which is what he did when the joint session resumed on January 6th after the attack on the Capitol.
What we just heard in that video was an aide to the White House Chief of Staff telling this committee that the White House Counsel's Office felt that this fake electors plan
Aquí estamos nuevamente. Sigue la audiencia en el Capitolio de los Estados Unidos sobre los disturbios de lo que sucedió el año pasado.
Speaker Bowers, were you aware that fake electors had met in Phoenix on December 14th and purported to cast electoral votes for President Trump?
I was not.
When you learned that these electors had met and sent their electoral votes to Washington, what did you think?
Well, I thought of the book, The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. And
Gracias a todos los que se conectan. Deme su comentario.
this is a tragic parody.
Mr. Bowers, I understand that as you flew from Phoenix to Washington yesterday, you reflected upon some passages from a personal journal that you were keeping in December 2020.
Sí, yo sé. Ellos ponen su enfoque siempre en otras cosas. Ahora están poniendo su enfoque en esto del Capitolio, la inflación fuera de control, todo virado al revés, los precios de la gasolina, todo por las nubes. Y ahora ellos deciden poner su mirada cuando no es en una legislación para la marihuana o enviar dinero a otros países. Ahora se concentran ellos en tratar de llevar una audiencia, que esto no es un día ni 2 días, para tratar de buscar culpables entonces para esta situación de lo que ocurrió en el Capitolio el año pasado. Y entonces, ¿a dónde vamos a llegar? Tantas cosas que hay ahora que arreglar en este país. La verdad que es triste que esto esté sucediendo. Inflación fuera de control, el país a punto de entrar en una recesión y ellos concentrados en una audiencia sobre lo que sucedió en el Capitolio.
To follow God's will as I believe He led my conscience to embrace. How else will I ever approach Him?
Gracias a todos por su respuesta a la pregunta con respecto si creen que el presidente Trump es culpable de los disturbios.
I ask this guidance only to show myself a coward in defending the course He let me take. He led me to take.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those are powerful words. I understand that taking the courageous positions that you did following the 2020 election in defense of the rule of law and protecting the voters of Arizona resulted in you and your family being subjected to protests and terrible threats. Can you tell us how this impacted you and your family?
Sí, él lo han amenazado por toda esta situación. Y le preguntan, ¿cómo han sido afectados tú y tu familia con todo esto?
My secretaries would say in excess of 20,000 emails and
El secretario de él ha recibido más de 20,000 correos electrónicos.
which saturated our offices and we were unable to work.
Ha saturado la oficina de ellos. Prácticamente no han podido llevar su función adelante.
Up till even recently, it is the new pattern or a pattern in our lives to worry what will happen on Saturdays because we have various groups come by and they have had video panel trucks with videos of me proclaiming me to be a pedophile and a pervert and a corrupt.
Sí, lo están tratando de acusar ahora a él de pervertido y otras cosas y han pasado por sus propiedades, varios grupos y las protestas.
Leaving literature both on my
Y que esto sí ha afectado a su familia.
arguing and threatening with neighbors and with myself. And I don't know if I should name groups, but there was a
No sé si debería decir los nombres de los grupos.
on his chest. and he had a pistol and was threatening my neighbor, not with the pistol, but
Llegan en grupos, han estado amenazando
When I
a
saw the gun,
nosotros
I
y
knew I had to
también
get
a nuestros
close.
vecinos.
And at the same time, on some of these, we had a daughter who was
Al
gravely
mismo
ill,
tiempo,
who was upset
tenemos una hija
by
que está muy
what was happening
molesta.
outside. And my wife, that was a valiant person, very, very strong,
Mi
quiet,
esposa es bien fuerte.
strong woman. So it was disturbing. It was disturbing.
No es fácil.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for your service to the state of Arizona and to the country.
Gracias por el servicio al estado de Arizona
Appropriate to take a short recess.
y al país. Vamos a tomar un receso. Fuertes declaraciones.
Chair requests that those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members and witnesses from the room. We'll have
Manténgase sentados.
5-minute recess.
5 minutos, un receso de 5 minutos. Pues hemos estado escuchando, amigos, declaraciones, audiencia, testimonios, han puesto videos, llamadas de lo que ha ocurrido después de las elecciones 2020, también sobre lo que se dice del fraude de votos, los disturbios en el Capitolio de los Estados Unidos. Están siendo interrogados algunos representantes de diferentes estados y la cuestión es ellos llegar a la conclusión con respecto a estos disturbios que lo causó. También han tocado el tema de las votaciones y el fraude. Estuvieron haciendo a él varias preguntas con respecto a eso también. Muchas cosas han sucedido. El país se encuentra ahora en una recesión, una inflación fuera de control. Más economistas se unen a la lista sobre ellos decir y estar de acuerdo con el resto de los analistas y economistas que dicen que se acerca una recesión para los Estados Unidos. Mientras que los políticos, ellos ponen la mirada y se concentran en llevar una audiencia que para muchos esto no tiene sentido. Tratar de pasar algunas legislaciones que no tienen sentido. Seguir enviando dinero a otros países cuando se necesitan muchas cosas arreglar aquí en los Estados Unidos. Y constantemente hemos estado viendo eso por los últimos meses. Las personas ya no pueden con los precios de la gasolina. Todo estaba ya prácticamente fuera de control. El presidente salió hace unos días. Le preguntaron con respecto a la recesión. Perdón, hace unos días, no, ayer le preguntaron y él respondió cuando estaba ahí de vacaciones en una de sus casas en la playa. Un reportero le preguntó y le dijo, los economistas están diciendo que se acerca una recesión para los Estados Unidos. El presidente tomó una pausa y respondió y dijo, no están diciendo eso, por favor. No se acerca una recesión para los Estados Unidos. Esa fue su respuesta. Me gustaría que usted me dé su opinión con respecto a lo que estamos viendo en la nación en estos momentos, los precios de la gasolina, cómo todo se ha salido fuera de control en estos momentos. Y estamos viendo ya un reporte que la gasolina ha llegado a algunos lugares del país a $10 el galón. Esto nunca se había visto en la historia de este país. $10 el galón. Se espera que pase $12 en algunos lugares. Cuando empezamos a hablar de esto hace alrededor de 3 meses atrás, todavía dábamos la noticia y nos hacía increíble creer que de verdad en algún momento la gasolina fuera a llegar a $10. Pues amigos, ya es confirmado, la gasolina ha llegado a $10 el galón en algunas ciudades del país. $10 el galón. Gracias a todos los que están conectados. Le agradezco mucho a todos los que han conectado y están pendientes. Lo que acusan son una bola de serpientes, porque si dijo de perros y gatos ofendería a los pobres. Vamos a ver, este gobierno está haciendo este juicio para desenfocar a la gente, para que no se enfoquen en el mal gobierno que tenemos. Eso lo están diciendo también. Es para desenfocar de lo que verdaderamente tenemos frente a nosotros, como la inflación, los problemas, la escasez, todo lo que está pasando en la pompa de gasolina. No pierdan el tiempo, ayudan al pueblo. Le pedimos grito. Okay. Quizás Biden quiso decir que ya la recesión ya llegó. Es increíble. Estamos viendo los reportes de la economía, de inflación. Estamos viendo cómo aumentan la tasa de interés agresivamente, 75 puntos básicos. Se aumentó la tasa de interés la última vez. Esto tenían que haberlo hecho el año pasado y hubiéramos estado posiblemente en una mejor posición en estos momentos. Esperaron demasiado porque según ellos la inflación iba a ser algo temporal y no fue así. Trump no es el presidente, lo único malo que hizo fue mandar a saltar el Capitolio. Ok. Ross Jiménez, usted dice que el expresidente mandó a asaltar el Capitolio. En alguna ocasión él lo dijo. ¿Hay algún video o algo así? Los demás que perdieron el voto latino. Ya no queremos más. Se espera que los republicanos nuevamente tomen el control en el Senado, que los demócratas pierdan una o dos sillas. Anteriormente los republicanos estaban en control del Senado porque eran la mayoría. En estos momentos están en control los demócratas en el Senado porque son la mayoría. Por eso es que se dice que están en control. Porque así es más fácil para ellos aprobar una legislación. La mayoría solamente porque tienen un voto que desempata, que es de la vicepresidenta, porque están ahora 50-50 en el Senado. 50 sillas demócratas, 50 sillas republicanos. ¿Verdad? Dijo Trump que esta era una cacería de brujas porque son puros demonios. Gracias a todos los que comentan. Deme su like, amigo. Regálame un like. Y deme su comentario de lo que estamos viendo. Audiencia en vivo. Están hablando y dando testimonio y presentando videos, llamadas, antes y después de las votaciones del 2020, las elecciones, y también que están tocando el tema principal sobre los disturbios enero 6 de 2021. No tiene cerebro ninguno de estos funcionarios. Es solo una distracción hacia la sociedad. Los demócratas son una cacería de brujas, pero Trump, presidente, eso es mentira. Gracias. Aprecio todas las cosas. Sí, todos. Ayer estuvimos en vivo hace 2 días y muchas personas en los comentarios decían que estaban comprando motos y no estaban usando sus carros. Me quedé sorprendido porque no podían con el precio de la gasolina. Ellos están desviando el dinero de este país. Da pena que estén hablando de un hombre. Estados Unidos, cada vez ahora peor. Esta guerra es Sí, la situación está muy, muy difícil, lo que estamos viendo. Y saludos, Blanca. Muy amable, gracias. Ciegos, el que diga que Trump no tiene culpa del ataque del Capitolio. Gracias, Pedrito, por tu comentario. Raúl, el palero de los demócratas. El palero de los demócratas. Explícame eso para poderte responder bien. No sé qué me estás tratando de llamar. No sé si es una ofensa o lo que quiere decir palero. Gracias. ¿Por qué los demócratas no discuten la inflación? Los jubilados, si pagamos renta, no. Esto es una situación de verdad. Estados Unidos está virado al revés. Ellos siempre han salido corriendo cuando se necesita ayuda en otros países. Siempre ha sido así. Por un lado no está mal, ¿no? Pero primero recuerda serte responsable por aquellos que están aquí, principalmente los retirados, los veteranos y personas que necesitan ayuda del gobierno, que no les alcanza el depósito del seguro social y el cheque que reciben del gobierno. Están peleando por destruir la creación de Dios, borrando al hombre, quitando el sexo, destruyendo a los niños. Estoy de acuerdo contigo. Por tener al pueblo informado de las realidades. Es un placer para mí. Regálame un like y dame tu comentario. Yo era demócrata, pero ahora soy republicano. Ok. Para aquellos que se acaban de conectar, estamos en vivo con la audiencia que están poniendo testimonios. Están también hablando frente a un jurado y un comité. Y hay varios congresistas los cuales están dando ellos su testimonio de lo ocurrido, tanto en el Capitolio como también en las elecciones 2020. La vida da muchas vueltas ahora con la situación en Estados Unidos. Muchos estadounidenses se están yendo a México a vivir. No solamente eso, hay muchas personas estadounidenses que se están también yendo a España y a otros países de Europa. Yo traje los números exactos de lo que estaba sucediendo, que nos tomó de verdad de sorpresa. Tanta pobreza que hay gente que no puede pagar su renta. Así es. Creo que va a seguir la audiencia. Estamos esperando. Habían dado un receso de 5 minutos. Yo sé que se extendió el receso. Hola Raúl, buenas. Todo es pura distracción porque el Partido Demócrata sabe que tiene la batalla perdida, quiso decir. Bendiciones y Dios proteja a Colombia. Ya llegó el comunismo a este país. Wow. Por su tiempo. Gracias a ti por estar aquí. Los demócratas son socialistas. Impuso el asalto al Capitolio. No hay duda que fue impulsado por Trump. Y eso está más claro que el agua. Ok. Gracias, José. Joe Biden will destroy our country. De los 13 troops. Joe Biden. Sí, eso fue cuando la salida de Afganistán. Eso fue un bochorno, la verdad que sí. El ataque y la toma de Oklahoma fue incitada por los demócratas y eso sí es un crimen que debía. Exactamente. Muchas gracias por tomar ese punto. Estás en lo correcto. ¿Por qué no llevaron una audiencia para esto que ocurrió en la toma de Oklahoma? ¿Por qué razón no hicieron lo mismo? Muy amable, gracias. Muy buen punto ese. Las profecías se están cumpliendo en nuestra presencia y no nos damos cuenta. Estamos viviendo los últimos días. Así es. Ahí, perdonen, están entrando muchos comentarios y ya están regresando del receso. Próximamente vamos a poner audio para ver lo que sucede en esta audiencia. Biden es un doble, un clon. Nunca pisó la Casa Blanca. Su discurso es detrás de un lugar donde se firman películas de presidente. Wow, no sabía eso. Si alguien me puede confirmar o decir algo sobre lo que está diciendo Han Rosado, que Biden es un doble, un clon, y que nunca pisó la Casa Blanca. Todo es cuestión de tiempo. Trump sabía que esto iba a pasar. Ahora que los demócratas preparen. Ok, estamos de regreso.
Trump's pressure campaign against state officials existed in all the key battleground states.
Pedrito, no soy ningún palero, no pertenezco a ninguna religión de ningún nombre como palo. Soy cristiano y no tengo nada que ver con ninguna religión. Gracias de todas maneras por tu comentario y no tiene nada de sentido. Gracias.
Just over 11,000 votes, that's all we need. They defrauded us out of a win in Georgia.
Ahí pusieron,
And we're not going to
están
forget
poniendo
it.
imágenes ahora en vivo de un pequeño video de lo que estuvo hablando el expresidente, que solamente necesitaban 11,000 votos. Están diciendo que las investigaciones con respecto a esto todavía se están llevando adelante estas investigaciones, dice él.
We welcome your cooperation, but we will share some of our findings with you today.
Le agradezco a todos ustedes por sus comentarios, por todo lo que están diciendo aquí en esta audiencia, pero también tenemos nosotros algunos videos y algunas imágenes que compartir con ustedes. Está diciendo él.
And then, since January 2019, as Georgia's Secretary of State.
Secretario de Estado del Estado de Georgia. ¿Está bien decir que tú querías que el expresidente Trump ganara las elecciones?
Many witnesses have told the Select Committee that Election Day, November 3rd, 2020, was a largely uneventful day in their home states. In spite of the challenges of conducting an election,
hay muchos testimonios que lo dicen.
You wrote in the Washington Post that the election was, quote, successful. Tell us, what was your impression of how Election Day had proceeded in Georgia?
Déjanos saber sobre las elecciones en Georgia. ¿Qué te pareció a ti de los resultados?
We meet at the GEMA headquarters. That's the Georgia Energy Emergency Management Association meeting location, but we are following wait times in line. In the afternoon, our average wait time was 3 minutes statewide. We were recording for various precincts. It actually got down to 2 minutes. And at the end of the day, we felt that we had a successful election from the standpoint of the administration and the operation of the election.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Raffensperger, did Joe Biden win the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, and by what margin?
President Biden carried the state of Georgia by approximately.
¿Por cuánto ganó el presidente Biden en Georgia?
And Mr. Secretary, as I understand it, your office took several steps to ensure the accuracy of the vote count in Georgia, reviewing the vote count in at least 3 different ways. These steps included a machine recount,
Yo sé que ustedes nuevamente recontaron los votos en el estado de Georgia de 3 diferentes maneras.
Including a recount of literally every ballot cast in the state of Georgia, confirmed the result.
Yes, they did. We counted the ballots. The first
Sí,
tabulation would be
lo
scanned.
contamos
And when we did our 100% hand audit of
y lo
the entire,
contamos
all 5 million
manualmente.
ballots in the state of Georgia, all cast in place, all absentee ballots.
No queríamos
they were all
ningún
hand
tipo de error.
recounted, and they came remarkably close to the first count. And then upon the election being certified, President Trump, because he was within 0.5%, could ask for a recount, and then we recounted him again.
Y como estábamos tan cerca, solamente por 0.5%, el expresidente podía pedir que nuevamente recontaran los votos. Porque el expresidente Donald Trump le pidió a Georgia que vuelva a contar los votos.
Began making numerous false allegations of voter fraud. False allegations that you and Mr. Sterling, among others, had to address. Mr. Sterling, thank you also for being here today.
Ustedes estuvieron diciendo que había fraude electoral.
I understand that you became a spokesperson to try to combat disinformation about the election and the danger it was creating for elections officials, among others. In a December 1 press conference, you addressed some of your remarks directly to President Trump. Let's take a look at what you said that day.
Vamos a ver lo que tú dijiste ese día.
Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. And you have the rights to go through.
Estamos investigando las elecciones del estado de Georgia. Mr. Presidente le está hablando ahí al expresidente Donald Trump porque hay posible fraude.
Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed. And it's not right. It's not right.
Mr. Sterling, what prompted you to make these remarks?
¿Qué te hizo hacer estas declaraciones?
Scheduled press conference that day, as we were in the habit of doing, trying to be as transparent as we could about the election and the counts going on. A little after lunch that day, lunchtime, I received a call from the project manager from Dominion Voting Systems, who was oddly, audibly shaken. She's not the kind of person I would assume would be that way. She has a master's from MIT, a graduate of the Naval Academy, and is very much on the ball and pretty unflappable. And she informed me about a young contractor they had who had been receiving threats from a video been posted by some QAnon supporters. And at that point, we had been sort of been steeping in this kind of stuff. So it was around us all the time. So I didn't take note of it more than adding to the pile of other stuff we were having to deal with. And I did pull up Twitter and I scrolled through it and I saw the young man's name. There was a particular tweet that, for lack of a better word, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Had a young man's name. It was a very unique name. I believe it was a first generation American. And it had his name. You committed treason. May God have mercy on your soul, with a slowly twisting gif of a noose. And for lack of a better word, I lost it. I just got irate. My boss was with me at the time, the Deputy Secretary, Jordan Fuchs, and she could tell that I was angry. I tend to turn red from here up when that happens, and that happened at that time. And she called Secretary Raffensperger to say, we're seeing these kind of threats, and Gabe thinks we need to say something about it. And Secretary said yes, and that's what prompted me to do what I did. I lost my temper, but it seemed necessary at the time because it was just getting worse. And I could not tell you why that particular one was the one that put me over the edge, but it did.
Now, after you made this plea to the president, did Donald Trump urge his supporters to avoid the use of violence?
Not to my knowledge.
Now, as we know, the president was aware of your speech because he tweeted about it later that day. Let's take a look at what the president said.
El expresidente, vamos a escuchar lo que dijo el expresidente Donald Trump,
In the tweet,
porque él escuchó lo que tú
Donald Trump
dijiste.
claims that there was, quote, massive voter fraud in Georgia.
Y él dijo
Mr.
aquí en
Sterling,
su
that was
cuenta de
just plain
Twitter que
false,
había
wasn't it?
fraude masivo en el estado de Georgia.
Nevertheless, the very next day, on December 2nd, President Trump released a lengthy video again making false claims of election fraud in Georgia. Let's take a look at what he said this time.
Y vamos a ver qué dijo en esta ocasión.
That were out of whack, all against me.
In fact, the day after Donald Trump released that video, so now we're talking just 2 days after the emotional warning that you gave that someone's going to get killed, representatives of President Trump appeared in Georgia, including Rudy Giuliani, and launched a new conspiracy theory that would take on a life of its own and threaten the lives of several innocent election workers. This story falsely alleges that sometime during election night, election workers at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, kicked out poll observers After the observers left,
Sí,
the story goes,
le está hablando con
his workers
respecto
pulled so-called suitcases of ballots
al nuevo
from
reconteo
under
en
a table
Georgia,
and ran those
que
ballots
habían
through
observadores,
counting
que ustedes saben
machines
cuando
multiple
cuentan las
times.
boletas, hay
Completely
observadores.
without evidence, President
Pues
Trump and his allies claimed that these
están diciendo
suitcases contained as many as
el equipo del
18,000 ballots,
expresidente
all for Joe
Biden,
Biden.
perdón, del
None
expresidente
of
Trump,
this
estuvo
was
diciendo
true.
que hubo
Rudy Giuliani
fraude
appeared
y
before
que
the
sacaron a
Georgia
los
State Senate
observadores,
and played a surveillance
y le está
video
hablando sobre esa
from State
situación
Farm
cuando
Arena,
estaban
falsely
recontando
claiming
los votos
that it
en
showed this
Georgia
conspiracy
nuevamente.
taking place.
Que eso fue
Here's
un
a sample
caos
of
lo
what
que se vivió en
Mr.
el país
Giuliani
porque
had to
hubieron
say
muchas
during
demandas
that hearing.
solamente por esta situación de remover
And when you look at what you
a los
saw on the
observadores.
video, which to me was a smoking gun, powerful smoking gun. Well, I don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened. I don't have to be a genius to figure out that those votes are not legitimate votes. You don't put legitimate votes under a table.
Giuliani está diciendo que
Wait
no
until you
tengo que
throw
ser
the
una
opposition
persona muy
out,
inteligente para
and in
darme
the
de
middle
cuenta
of the
del
night
fraude y de
count
todo
them.
lo que
We would
se
have to be
vivió
fools to think that.
con las
President Trump's
votaciones de
campaign amplified
2020.
Giuliani's false testimony in a tweet, pushing out the video footage. Giuliani likewise pushed out his testimony on social media. As you can see in this tweet, Mr. Giuliani wrote that it was, quote, now beyond doubt, unquote, that Fulton County Democrats had stolen the election. Later in this hearing, we'll hear directly from one of the election workers in this video about the effect these lies had on her and on her family. Mr. Sterling, did the investigators in your office review the entire surveillance tape from the State Farm Arena on election night?
They actually reviewed approximately 48 hours going over the time period where action was taking place at the counting center at State Farm Arena.
And what did the tape actually show?
Depending on which time you want to start, because as was mentioned, this conspiracy theory took on a life of its own, where they conflated a water main break that wasn't a water main break and throwing observers out and a series of other things. What it actually showed
Estamos en vivo con la audiencia desde el
engaging
Capitolio. En
in
estos momentos están hablando sobre las elecciones,
one of the specific things,
votaciones
one of the things
y
very frustrating
también
was the so-called suitcases
sobre
of
la
ballots from under the
audiencia
table.
de los
If you
disturbios
watched the
en el
entirety
Capitolio.
of the video, you saw that these were election workers who were under the impression they were going to get to go home around 10:30. People are putting on their coats. They're putting ballots that are prepared to be scanned into ballot carriers that are then sealed with tamper-proof seals so that they can, they're not messed with. It's an interesting thing because you watch there's 4 screens of the video. And as you're watching it, you can see the election monitors in the corner with the press as they're taking these ballot carriers and putting them under the table. You see it there. One of the other hidden ones, if you looked at the actual tape, was on the outside of the table, just from the camera angle. You couldn't see it originally. And this goes under the no good deed goes unpunished. We were told that we were at GEMA, as the secretary pointed out, and we were told that it looked like they were shutting down the Fulton County counting. The secretary expressed some displeasure at that because we wanted to everybody keep counting so we could get to the results and know what was happening. So our elections director called their elections director, who was at another location because this was election day. There was 2 different places where ballot things were being done by the Fulton County office. So he called the elections director from Fulton, then called Ralph Jones, who was at the State Farm Arena, and said, "What the heck are you doing? Go ahead and stay." And as you watch the video itself, you see him take the phone call as people are putting things away, getting ready to leave. You can tell for about 15
Gracias,
seconds,
Pedro.
he does not want to tell these people they have to stay. He walks over, he thinks about it for a second, you see him come back to the corner of a desk and kind of slumps his shoulders and says, "Okay, y'all, we got to keep on counting." And then you see him take their coats off, get the ballots out. And then a secondary thing that you'll see on there is you'll have people who are counting ballots who a batch will go through, they will take them off and run that through again. What happens there is a standard operating procedure. If there's a misscan, if there's a misalignment, if it doesn't read right, these are high speed, high capacity scanners. So 3 or 4 will go through after a misscan. You have to delete that batch and put it back through again. And by going through the hand tally, as the secretary pointed out, we showed that if there had been multiple ballots scanned without a corresponding physical ballot, your counts would have been a lot higher than the ballots themselves. And by doing the hand tally, we saw 2 specific numbers that were met. The hand tally got us to a 0.1053% off of the total votes cast and 0.0099% on the margin. which is essentially
Deme
head-on accurate.
su opinión, amigos.
Academic studies say on
Se lo
hand
voy
tally,
a
you'll have
agradecer.
between 1 and 2%, but because
Audiencia
we use
sobre los
marking devices where
disturbios
it's
que han
very
ocurrido en el
clear
Capitolio el
what
año
the
pasado.
voter intended, made it a
En esta
lot easier
ocasión
for
están
task
hablando
force to
también del
conduct the hand
fraude
count and showed that
electoral.
none of that was true.
Now, I understand that when you reviewed these tapes and did the analysis, it disproved this conspiracy theory. But you still had to take a lot of steps to try to make sure the public knew the truth about these allegations. And you did frequent briefings for the press. Let's take a look at one of those press briefings, Mr. Sterling, that you held on December 7th to make the point that you just did today.
Move on to what I'm going to call Disinformation Monday. Out of the gate, many of y'all saw the videotape from State Farm Arena. I spent hours with our post-certified investigators, Justin Gray from WSB.
Amigos, tenemos en pantalla declaraciones de lo que está pasando en estos momentos en vivos sobre, ahora mismo están hablando del fraude electoral y se están concentrando en lo sucedido ahora mismo en Georgia. Me gustaría que usted me dé su opinión, lo voy a agradecer, la situación de lo que estamos viendo alrededor del país y ahora ellos nos ponen esto al frente y muchas personas están perdiendo el enfoque de lo que verdaderamente importa. Me gustaría que usted me dé su opinión. Mira hasta dónde llegamos con Biden. No miren el precio de combustible, es doble el año pasado. Sí. Así es. Quieren sacar a Trump para poder llevar su agenda y poder meterse
What was it like to compete with a president who had the biggest bully pulpit in the
aquí en Las
world
Vegas
to push out these
están
false claims?
las vacías, Sam y Walmart, el pollo, la carne, sí. Estuvimos hablando ayer sobre eso y verdad están bien disparados los precios.
Reticence of people who needed to believe it because the president of the United States, whom many looked up to and respected, was telling them it wasn't true, despite the facts. And I characterized at one point, it was kind of like a shovel trying to empty the ocean. And yes, it was frustrating. I even have, family members who I had to argue with about some of these things. And I would show them things. And the problem you have is you're getting into people's hearts. I remember there's one specific, an attorney that we know that we showed and walked him through. This wasn't true. Okay, I get that. This wasn't true. Okay, I get that. This wasn't 5 or 6 things. But at the end, he goes, I just know in my heart they cheated. That's just, and so once you get past the heart, the facts don't matter as much. And our job, from our point of view, is to get the facts out, do our job, tell the truth, follow the Constitution, follow the law.
Nuestro trabajo es seguir la Constitución, hacer todo correctamente. Están haciendo preguntas porque él en algunas ocasiones también dio declaraciones apoyando al expresidente Donald Trump sobre posible fraude.
I'm going to ask you to look up at that very, very powerful and very expensive screen.
Hidden cases of possible ballots are rolled out from under a table. 4 people under a cloud of suspicion.
So, if you just take the crime of what those
Wow.
Democrats...
Imágenes de personas que entraron en la madrugada y estuvieron moviendo bolsas con boletas dentro, y eso es lo que estuvo enseñando en pantalla.
This committee's hearing last Monday, we heard from senior federal law enforcement officials, from the senior-most federal law enforcement official in Atlanta at the time, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, B.J. Pack, as well as former Attorney General Bill Barr. They both testified that the allegations were thoroughly investigated and found to have no merit. Here is U.S. Attorney Pack.
To go to Attorney General Barr, I told him that we looked into it. We've done several things, including interviewing the witnesses. I listened to the tapes and reviewed the videotape myself, and that there was nothing there. Giuliani was wrong in representing that this was suitcase full of ballots.
Están desmintiendo las declaraciones de Giuliani, que él dijo que sí había fraude en las votaciones. Y ahora están hablando sobre los disturbios del 6 de enero.
Including the interviews of the key witnesses, the Fulton County allegations had no merit.
We also have testimony from senior Department of Justice officials establishing that they specifically told President Trump that these allegations had been thoroughly investigated and were completely without merit. Here's Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue describing a phone conversation in which he specifically told President Trump that these allegations were false.
Aquí hay más declaraciones que uno de los abogados del expresidente Donald Trump que estuvo diciendo que él le dijo al expresidente que no había ningún fraude. Y eso es lo que están tratando de probar en con estas preguntas.
No matter how many times senior Department of Justice officials, including his own Attorney General, told the president that these allegations were not true, President Trump kept promoting these lies and putting pressure on state officials to accept them. On January 2nd,
el presidente Trump siguió poniendo presión en diferentes estados sobre fraude, está diciendo él.
The White House, including the former president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, repeatedly called or texted the secretary's office some 18 times in order to set up this call. They were quite persistent. Second, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows took the extraordinary step of showing up at a signature audit site in Georgia, where he met with Secretary Raffensperger's chief investigator, Francis Watson, who was supervising that audit process. Behind me is a photograph from that visit.
Atrás de mí hay una fotografía.
Third, the day after Meadows' Georgia visit, he set up a call between President
Que
Trump
está en pantalla.
and Francis Watson. On the call between President
Están
Trump
hablando de la
and
presión
Georgia
que dice él que
investigator
según
Francis Watson,
estaba poniendo el
former
expresidente
president
Donald Trump
pushed the
a
false claim that he'd won the state
diferentes
of
estados
Georgia.
de la nación,
Let's listen
a los
to that part
gobernadores,
of the
para
conversation.
que salieran ellos a hablar la verdad sobre fraude electoral. Y en muchas ocasiones hacían muchísimas llamadas para tratar de ellos llevar su mensaje.
And in this next clip, he told the state law enforcement official that she'd be praised if she found the right answer.
I will, when the right answer comes out, you'll be praised. I mean, I don't know why, they've made it so hard. They will be praised. People will say, great, because that's what it's about, that ability to check and to make it right. Because everyone knows it's wrong. There's just no way.
Mr. Raffensperger, I know you weren't on this call, but that you have listened to it. President Trump didn't win by hundreds of thousands of votes in Georgia, did he?
No, he did not. I've been traveling through the state of Georgia for a year now, and simply put, in a nutshell,
El presidente Trump no ganó el estado de Georgia por muchos votos.
and yet
Y
they
él
voted
dice
down
no.
ballot in other races. And the Republican congressman ended up getting 33,000 more votes than President Trump. And that's why President Trump came up short.
Y que finalmente el presidente Trump en el último conteo se quedó corto.
Let's listen to another part of the conversation between President Trump and Ms. Watson.
Anyway, but whatever you can do, Francis, it would be it's a great thing. It's an important thing for the country. It's so important. You have no idea it's so important. Well, and I very much appreciate it.
Whatever you can do, Francis. This is the President of the United States calling an investigator looking into the election in which he is a candidate and asking her to do whatever you can do. Mr. Secretary,
Este es el presidente de los Estados Unidos llamando a diferentes congresistas y algunos que se están postulando para hablarle de la situación del voto.
Including coins, actual autographed MAGA hats, etc. White House staff intervened to make sure that didn't happen. It was clear at the time of this call that the former president had his sights set on January 6th. Listen to this portion when he told Francis Watson about a very important date.
You think they'll be working after Christmas and keep it going fast? Because, we have that date of the 6th, which is a very important date.
That important date, of course, was the joint session of Congress, where Georgia's electoral votes would be counted for Joe Biden. A little over a week after this call to Francis Watson, the president was finally able to speak with you, Secretary Raffensperger. Bear in mind, as we discuss this call today, that by this point in time, early January, the election in Georgia had already been certified. But perhaps more important, the President of the United States had already been told repeatedly by his own top Justice Department officials that the claims he was about to make to you about massive fraud in Georgia were completely false. Mr. Secretary, the call between you and the President lasted 67 minutes, over an hour. We obviously can't listen to the entire recording here today, although it is available on the Select Committee's website. We'll listen to selected excerpts of it now.
Regálame un like y por favor dame tu comentario, se lo voy a agradecer.
Thoroughly debunked allegations of suitcases of ballots.
In an official voter box, they were in what looked to
Están
be
poniendo llamadas del expresidente Donald Trump, donde estuvo hablando con diferentes funcionarios del gobierno.
in voter boxes.
Y esta llamada, por ejemplo, duró más de una
We
hora.
watched it and they watched it certified in slow motion, instant replay, if you can believe it. But it had slow motion and it was magnified many times over. And the minimum was 18,000 ballots, all for Biden.
These are the allegations that the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and your office heads all said were false. Is that right?
Correct. And even more importantly, when B.J. Pack resigned as U.S. Attorney of the Northern District, President Trump appointed as acting U.S. Attorney of the Northern District, Bobby Christine. And Bobby Christine looked at that, and he was quoted in the AJC that he found nothing, and he dismissed that case early on.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The President references suitcases or trunks. Mr. Sterling, were the objects seen in these videos suitcases or trunks, or were they just the ordinary containers that are used by election workers?
They're standard ballot carriers that allow for seals to be put on them so they're tamper-proof.
And finally, the President claims that there was a minimum of 18,000 ballots somehow smuggled in, all for Biden. I take it, gentlemen, that was also categorically false?
There's no physical way he can know who those ballots were for, but secondarily, Fulton County for years has been an issue in our state when it comes to elections. So they had a very difficult time during the primary, in large part because of COVID. So we had put them under a consent decree the Secretary got negotiated, where we had a monitor on site. And his name is Carter Jones. And he took a notation. He had gone from State Farm to the English Street warehouse to look at election day activities. But before he left the State Farm Arena, he noted how many ballots had been counted on each one of the machines. And when he came back after we found out they were working again, he took note again when they closed. And I believe the final number was something around 8,900 total ballots were scanned from the time he left to the time about 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning. So way below 18,000.
Let's play the next clip.
I heard it was close. I said, there's no way. But they dropped a lot of votes in there late at night. You know that, Brad.
Mr. Secretary, did somebody drop a lot of votes there late at night?
No. I believe that the president was referring to some of the counties when they would upload, but the ballots had all been accepted and had to be accepted by state law by 7 p.m. So there were no additional ballots accepted after 7 p.m.
Let's play the next clip in which the president makes claims about so-called dead voters.
The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted. And I think the number is in the close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries, they went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number. And a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters.
Mr. Secretary, did your office investigate whether those allegations were accurate? Did 5,000 dead people in Georgia vote?
No, it's not accurate. And actually, in their lawsuits, they allege 10,315 dead people. We found 2 dead people when I wrote my letter to Congress that stated January 6th. And subsequent to that, we found 2 more. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 people, not 4,000, but just a total of 4, not 10,000, not 5,000.
Let's play the next clip.
And there's nothing wrong with saying that, you know, that you've recalculated, because the 2,236 and absentee ballots, I mean, they're all exact numbers that were done by accounting firms, law firms, etc. And even if you cut them in half, cut them in half, and cut them in half again, it's more votes than we need.
Mr. Secretary, is there any way that you could have lawfully changed the result in the state of Georgia and somehow explained it away as a recalculation?
No, the numbers are the numbers. The numbers don't lie. We had many allegations and we investigated every single one of them. In fact, I challenged my team, did we miss anything? They said that there was over 66,000 underage voters. We found that there's actually 0. You can register to vote in Georgia. When you're 17 and a half, you have to be 18 by election day. We checked that out, every single voter. They said that there was 2,423 non-registered voters. There was 0. They said that there was 2,056 felons. We identified less than 74 or less that were actually still in felony sentence. Every single allegation we checked, we ran down the rabbit trail to make sure that our numbers were accurate.
So there's no way you could have recalculated it except by fudging the numbers.
The numbers were the numbers, and we could not recalculate because we had made sure that we had checked every single allegation. And we had many investigations. We had nearly 300 from the 2020 election.
Mr. Secretary, you tried to push back when the president made these unsupported claims, whether they were about suitcases of ballots or that Biden votes were counted 3 times. Let's play the next clip.
President, they did not put that. We did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times. Yeah, Mr. President, we'll send you the link from WSB that doesn't.
I don't care about a link. I don't need it. I have a much, Brad, I have a much better link.
You told the president you would send him a link from WSB, which I understand is a local television station that had a unedited video from the State Farm Arena. But the president wasn't interested in that. He said he had a much better link. Mr. Secretary, at the time that you were on the call with the president, as we have shown, both the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation have proven these claims to be nonsense. And you told him about these investigations on the phone. Let's listen to what President Trump had to say about the state and federal law enforcement officers who investigated these false claims.
There's no way they could, then they're incompetent. They're either dishonest or incompetent, okay? There's only 2 answers, dishonesty or incompetence. There's just no way, look, there's no way.
But the president didn't stop at insinuating that law enforcement officers were either dishonest or incompetent. He went on to suggest that you could be subject to criminal liability for your role in the matter. Before I play that portion of the conversation, I'd like to show you something that the president retweeted a couple weeks before your call with him. Here's the president retweeting a post from one of his allies, a lawyer who was later sanctioned by a judge in Michigan for making false claims of election fraud. Let's take a look at that tweet. The tweet read, quote, President Trump, @real Donald Trump, is a genuinely good man. He does not really like to fire people. I bet he dislikes putting people in jail, especially quote unquote Republicans. He gave @Brian Kemp, Georgia, and @Georgia Secretary of State every chance to get it right. They refused. They will soon be going to jail. So on your call, this was not the first time the president was suggesting you might be criminally liable. With that, let's listen to this portion of the call.
I think you're going to find that they are shredding ballots because they have to get rid of the ballots because the ballots are unsigned. The ballots are corrupt. And they're brand new and they don't have seals and there's a whole thing with the ballots, but the ballots are corrupt. And you're going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk.
Secretary Raffensperger, after making a false claim about shredding of ballots, the president suggested that you may be committing a crime by not going along with his claims of election fraud. And after suggesting that you might have criminal exposure, President Trump makes his most explicit ask of the call. Let's play a part of that conversation.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Mr. Secretary, was the president here asking you for exactly what he wanted? One more vote than his opponent.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find. We had continued to look. We investigated, like I just shared the numbers with you. There were no votes to find. That was an accurate count that had been certified. And as our general counsel said, there was no shredding of ballots.
Mr. Secretary, after making this request, the president then goes back to the danger of having you deny these allegations of fraud. Let's listen to that part of the clip.
And I watched you this morning and you said, well, there was no criminality, but I mean, all of this stuff is very dangerous stuff. When you talk about no criminality, I think it's very dangerous for you to say that.
Secretary Raffensperger, you wrote about this in your book, and you said, quote, I felt then and still believe today that this was a threat. Others obviously thought so too, because some of Trump's more radical followers have responded as if it was their duty to carry out this threat. Please tell us what you, your wife, even your daughter-in-law experienced regarding threats from Trump's more radical followers.
Well, after the election, my email, my cell phone was doxxed, and so I was getting texts all over the country, and then eventually my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting. You have to understand that Trish and I, we met in high school, and we've been married over 40 years now, and so they started going after her, I think, just to probably put pressure on me. Why don't you just quit, walk away? And so that happened. And then some people broke into my daughter-in-law's home, and my son has passed, and she's a widow and has 2 kids. And so we're very concerned about her safety also.
And Mr. Secretary, why didn't you just quit and walk away?
Because I knew that we had followed the law and we had followed the Constitution. And I think sometimes moments require you to stand up and just take the shots. You're doing your job. And that's all we did. You know, we just followed the law and we followed the Constitution. And at the end of the day, President Trump came up short. But I had to be faithful to the Constitution. And that's what I swore an oath to do.
During the remainder of the call, the former president continued to press you to find the remaining votes that would ensure his victory in Georgia. Let's listen to a little more.
Why wouldn't you want to find the right answer, Brad, instead of keep saying that the numbers are right? So look, can you get together tomorrow? And Brad, we just want the truth. It's simple. And everyone's going to look very good if the truth comes out. It's okay. It takes a little while, but let the truth come out. And the real truth is I won by 400,000 votes, at least. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
4 days after the president's call to Secretary Raffensperger was January 6th. The president whipped up the crowd in front of the ellipse, once again promoting the allegation that Secretary Raffensperger, the president's own attorney general, had told him was false. Here he is on the ellipse.
In Fulton County, Republican poll watchers were ejected, in some cases physically, from the room under the false pretense of a pipe burst, water main burst, everybody leave, which we now know was a total lie. Then election officials pulled boxes, Democrats, and suitcases of ballots out from under a table. You all saw it on television, totally fraudulent, and illegally scanned them for nearly 2 hours, totally unsupervised. Tens of thousands of votes. This act coincided with a mysterious vote dump of up to 100,000 votes for Joe Biden, almost none for Trump,
Oh, that sounds fair. That was at 1:34 a.m.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Sterling, I want to thank you for your service to the state of Georgia and to the country. Speaker Bowers, likewise, I want to thank you for your service to the state of Arizona and to the country. You have served not only your home states, but our nation and our democracy. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. I thank the witnesses for joining us today. You are now dismissed.